Get started. Okay. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our policy discussion on mental health and trauma. We are so excited to have everybody here and have a robust discussion about mental health, trauma, how we deal with this as a community, and not just focusing even on COVID, but just coping in general as a person and what we go through in our daily lives. So I'm India Johnson. I am the founder and CEO of Yellow Heart Committee. No, yay.
Hello, I'm Nonye. I am a policy intern for Yellow Heart Committee. Yeah.
Thank you. And so before we get started, want to give a little bit of background on YHC, why it started, and what our mission and everything is. So trigger warning here about rape and sexual assault. I am a survivor of sexual assault myself. On January 1st, 2019, I was assaulted. And on March 24th, 2019, I had went in for a jaw surgery, which was already pre-scheduled, but came out paralyzed and unable to walk. What happened to me was called conversion disorder, which is when you convert the psychological stress into a physical reaction. So I was basically so traumatized from my assault that I was physically paralyzed from it. And so I had to spend a couple of weeks in a rehab facility, relearning all of my skills, walking, talking, eating, and everything to become back to partially normal for what I am now. But while I was there, it really inspired me to want to make sure that no one else endures trauma the way that I did, or is ashamed to talk about the mental health component of it as well. And so I always tell people YHC was literally born out of a hospital bed because I was still in the hospital when I decided that this is what I want to do. I want to create a nonprofit that supports other survivors of trauma and also destigmatizes discussing mental health and everything that goes into it. So now, fast forward 2 years, we have 28 people on board. No one's paid yet, but we've put on countless events, raised money, and have done so much for the community and policy work, and can't wait to see where we go to from now. But we can go ahead and go to our mission. So YHC is an organization that mobilizes to support the holistic mental health of trauma survivors through political advocacy, education, and community outreach. So this is achieved through our pillars of heart, which is healing, empowerment, advocacy, relationships, and therapy. This is our beautiful team. Like I said, I am so proud to see all the diversity, the young faces, and just the passion. I always like to remind people that we are a team of young people who either work full-time, in school full-time, doing both somehow full-time, and also outside obligations and dealing with our own mental health crises and things like that. And one of our teammates is actually pregnant and due in about a month. So super excited to be having a YHC baby joining us now. But our vision is that we are actively working towards a world where the barriers between people and policy are broken and survivors of trauma have access to comprehensive, holistic spaces of healing and comprehensive education for their mental health. So, without further ado, Leaders Link Up, a policy discussion on mental health and trauma. And to give context, Leaders Link Up essentially means that we bring the leaders from that community together to have a good discussion about it, and coming from the experts, the policymakers, and the survivors themselves to contribute their own anecdotes for what's going on and to work to make a solution. So with that, I'll pass it off to Nonye.
All right. Thanks, India.
Mhm.
I just want to thank everyone again for coming. It's going to be a really exciting discussion today. So for today's Leaders Link Up, we'll be discussing mental health, as you all know. To guide us, provide us insight, and help us all grow, we've invited our wonderful guest speakers and moderators. First up, we have California Assemblymember Blanca Rubio, whose many accomplishments as a champion for those with mental health needs includes Assembly Bill 2698, which improves student mental health services. Accompanying her to provide technical and expert advice are three lovely therapists. First, we have Artemis J. Rose, then we have Melissa Satram, and Dr. Q. Napoleon Dargan.
And this event will be moderated with three impactful leaders of the community: the founder of Speak Up Not Man Up, Jake Marble, and school counselor Ron Smith. And so I will now hand the event off to Ron and just thank you all again for joining and have an amazing discussion.
Thank you, India, for that. Wonderful introduction, and thank you for hosting something like this. I think it's important to let stories be heard and also have the people who are in the position to affect some sort of change be able to lead some of that discussion. So I want to start this conversation off by first posing the question, Assemblymember Rubio, I'll start with you, of how have you been able to maintain positive, if not positive, negative? How has your mental health been throughout this pandemic?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's an honor to be able to have this conversation. We were chatting earlier about kind of our own personal stories. And even though I hold the position of an assembly member, I am the proud mother of a 14-year-old boy and a 13-year-old girl. And I said that my 14-year-old boy is definitely a 14-year-old boy. And so just so you know that, yes, I have this great title, but I am human. I have the same issues that everybody else does. I need to make sure that my kids are fed, they're being successful in school and mentally successful. And that's what this conversation is about. And I have to tell you that it's just been really difficult. I am a really positive person just by nature. I believe always that there's nothing that we can't overcome. And I'll share just quickly, I was born in Mexico, and my family and I were deported when we were kids. We went to Texas and we were deported when we were kids, came back to California. I was undocumented until I was 13, became a citizen in 1994 and held my very first political office in 1997. And so for me, just being here, being able to grow up in the United States and have the ability to really have that quote unquote American dream, for me, it's just, there's no reason to ever be sad. This is just amazing. We left circumstances behind. And so for me, just being positive all the time is kind of in my nature now, because I'm so grateful to be here. But I have to tell you, this pandemic has really kind of highlighted a lot of the issues that we normally have as just human beings. But in my position, having to really see other people's pain has been really, really difficult. I have a staff of 5 down in my district in West Covina. I live in Baldwin Park, and then a staff of 6 up at the Capitol. And just dealing with the everyday struggles of our own kind of not wanting to get out of bed, everybody's kind of depressed. And so for one, I made it a point that no matter what day it was, I get up at the same time. My routine has always been get up, take a shower, get ready for work, and go. So I've done the get up at the same time, get ready, full on makeup and full on hair. Because if I don't do that, my reaction and my natural kind of state is to just stay in bed. I was a teacher for 16 years. And I don't know if you felt this, Ron, but as soon as the summer break came, it was like trying to disconnect was really difficult. So I would spend literally 2 or 3 days kind of in my house, would not be able to get out because I was like, my body was like, what's happening? And so I felt that if I did not continue with my routine, that's the state that I was going to be in. So same routine, getting up, full on makeup, full on hair. Even if only the top was kind of the clothing and still the shorts underneath, would still help me get through this. But add to that, like I said, not only, my own state, but I have a 14-year-old son who is also ADHD. And then my daughter, trying to make sure that they were okay, trying to deal with, Zoom school. My daughter's fine. She can be in a room and I just get updates. But my son, if I'm not on him every single minute, then, we're either fighting or, he's like, I can't do this. So he struggles. So anyway, so I take that experience kind of a sign as to what everybody else is dealing with. And I'm blessed to be able to provide my kids with a roof over their head, food on the table. And we didn't think about this, but the devices to be able to Zoom school. My community down, I represent the 48th Assembly District, which is in the San Gabriel Valley, about 22 miles east of downtown LA. we're not so privileged over there. I don't know if you saw the meme kind of in the middle of the pandemic of a couple little girls sitting outside of a
Right.
Taco Bell trying to access the Wi-Fi because they didn't have any at home. Kind of represents a big portion of my district. Some of our folks didn't have food, you know, they all lost their jobs. And the ones that didn't lose their jobs were going to work and being infected by by COVID. So it's just been really difficult, and not being able to do something, I think, is what really causes me the most pain, because here I am, today I'm at the state capitol, in the state capitol where everything happens, and I can't even provide, you know, some support for those families that need us so much. It's been difficult, but more so for staff. Staff has been working from home, but they're getting all the EDD calls, people not being able to get their checks on time. They don't have food. I've been, again, blessed enough to have a wide network. And so we've been doing a lot of food distributions where we've been able to provide food for 400 families, kind of on a regular basis. Over Thanksgiving, I wanted to be able to support them. And so usually on a typical year, we give about 500 turkeys away. This year, I was like, okay, I know it's going to be a rough one. So we planned for 1,500. We ended up with 2,500, having to run to like, I think it was Smart and Final to get additional gift cards so we can provide food for folks. We ended up with a few extra cards. And once we fed 2,500 families, some of those cards went into the office, and to the point where my staff was calling, crying, saying, these folks don't have any food. Can we give them the cards away? And I'm like, just give them away. So trying to keep my own mental health on check, my children, then, trying to take care of a community, trying to take care of staff who was breaking down because they're hearing all these stories has been quite a challenge. But, with God's help and kind of my own family network, my friends and my family, we've been able to maintain kind of the bare minimum of being able to function. And so I'm just really grateful that I see the light at the end of the tunnel, that this pandemic is at least over in that sense, because at least now we can continue business and really go out into the community and really provide some real, like, tangible support. We all say we support you, and we do, but sometimes, saying it and doing it are two different things. I know I'm a little long-winded, so you need to keep me on check because I have a lot to say.
Understood. Thank you for that.
Can I chime in a little bit?
Of course.
As a therapist, I think what I've seen, especially with the Black Lives Matter, the Asian hate going on, we have all these other, and the pandemic. So I've had, like, my private practice, I have a long waiting list of people trying to get in. So anxiety is heightened. Even like for kids that are, for my daughter, she entered middle school in the pandemic. So when she transitioned back into hybrid, her anxiety level was like through the roof. So I think that people's mental health is kind of just deteriorated. And for me, the way I handled it, and I tell my clients all the time, having a healthy mind, healthy soul, working out, eating right. When you're working from home, you forget to, like, take those breaks. You forget to go walk outside for 10 minutes, get that vitamin D. And also, like, not being able to see your family the way you wanted. Like, I'm very connected to my family. So that was difficult in its own, like, not being able to access family, my kids not being able to play with their friends or cousins. So for me, and like I grew up, and the way I grew up in a household of domestic violence. So a lot of things resurfaced for me during the pandemic because I had time to reflect and think about things. So I think it kind of set people back, but it made me more compassionate towards other people. So I think that that was something that I learned. I need to slow down a little bit, soak it a little bit, and be more compassionate towards others.
Absolutely. And I think both of you guys touched on a really important point about the importance of support systems in trying to handle change and handle something that is overcoming the lives of everyone. So I'm curious to know a little bit more about, specifically for the kids, as I work with TK through 8th grade, also through high school as a coach. I'm curious to know how we can support our kids' mental health, being that you guys have both mentioned that you have kids, and I'm curious to know, at least from the therapist standpoint as well, what kind of things and support systems can we set in place to support our kids' mental health? And Artemis, I haven't heard from you, so I would like to hear something from you as well.
Yeah, so I'm expanding and adding to what everybody shared. I really think with the pandemic too, with being on the devices so much, it's created a lot of rupture in attachment, where now with children having to be more on Zoom, there needs to be less, more mindful expectations of what we're placing on them, because, you know, being dysregulated in our nervous system with constant technology, it makes it really difficult to be grounded. And I think, and expecting children to be able to pay attention with being on a screen all day. I know I can't do the screen all day, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. So to expect kids whose their brain is still developing and they actually need attunement and attachment and regulation for mirroring and to be able to regulate their emotions, I think it's a huge challenge for us right now. In addition to what's already been said, that with the pandemic, having so much space where you have a routine, you rely on your community, your systems outside, to go work out or do all these things, but now you have to stay at home. Your routine is also like out the window, but it's like, you know, just being other sorts of resources or support. It's hard to now have these expectations. You have to do it all on your own. So, and referencing back to with what can be done also for kids is, I think just like engaging in a little bit of like breathing with them and a little bit of play and spontaneity, because I think a lot of, like, even with ADHD, right, there's a lot of stigmatization with like, with behavioral issues and not being able to pay attention. But a lot of that is the need for play, connection, creativity, highlighting our kids' strengths. And I know there's a lot of pressure put on the teachers for what they have to get done. I mean, we're all like trying to do the best that we can, like from where we're at. But I think how we can better support our kids, though, is actually taking a couple moments and breathing with them. Because if we're dysregulated, like I know with my clients, a lot of time, if I'm back to back and it's just been, and I'm feeling a little ungrounded, you know, those times I take to slow down with them and do a couple of breaths, and I'm leading them through the grounding, helps regulate me, which helps them ground them. And then we're kind of co-regulating together, because that's another thing is, you know, at the end of the day, we're all human, like, right. And we all need to co-regulate with one another, in community, especially. I think that needs to be the, like, one of the one of the priorities is co-regulation around that. So.
Right. And I think you bring up a good point, and I want to transition here a little bit about technology and its use. I've seen how many people talk about how we need to separate a little bit more from technology because of the effects that it can play on our brain and on our systems, and how we're supposed to be in connection with others. But I've also talked to my students in preparation for this, and something that they brought up to me, which I didn't think about so much, is that when the pandemic started, technology became their best way to communicate and have that community with others. So they have adults telling them, stay off of social media, stay off of the technology. You can't be on this all day, go outside. But that is their way of connecting with their friends and connecting with their community. So I want to pose this to you, Napoleon. How can we find that balance? And this is a huge question, you might not find the answer, but how can we find that balance between the students and kids having that access to social media from a community standpoint and having that connection, but also not having it become their main focus and pulling away from their social connection in person?
Great question. Great question. When I hear of it, it makes me kind of think about this in a different perspective of, like, people thinking of like hip hop culture in African American culture, or hip hop in African American culture, and how at one point in time it was like, oh, you know, you can't listen to that because But like, hey, that is the sound, that is what culture is, and then it ends up creating this gap So I'm glad that this comes up, because I think it really calls for us to, as the other practitioner was saying, engage in a way, whether it's in breath, but I want to say in more sophisticated ways, and trying to find out like what's going on, so we can actually learn how to speak their language, utilize the language to actually identify what's important. For example, I just seen a few family members a few days ago, and I was like, oh wow, like I see the impact of COVID. I see the weight. I see the increased ways that we self-medicate, whether that's smoking marijuana or shopping, or and I'm developing a program right now for my family that is about utilizing the STEP program in our phones, utilizing our Facebook groups, all of this in a way of like connecting us to wellness through the platform of this express highway. So I'm saying that to say, I think we as a healthcare field have to increase our sophistication in the way that we utilize technology to assess, and then use that to engage and move the people forward so they can see the value. I'll say one more thing. I think that's one of the reasons why our youth struggle so much with engaging healthcare are pastors, because I think there's a held value that's poor, and that it's gonna be such a lack of sophistication, and it's so easy to then kind of tune off, So yeah, I think we got to tune up, and we got to find ways to utilize and speak the lingo.
Definitely. And that also makes me think a little bit about, and I'll pose this to you, Assembly Member, of how these different mental health challenges and things that have either been a little more highlighted from the pandemic, or things that have at least been a little bit more in conversation from this time. How has this shift towards mental health awareness affected what type of policies that you pursue?
Sorry about that. I was trying to unmute. Well, first, I forgot to mention before we go into that one, I got a dog about 2 years ago. Her name is Jaxie, and I was like I don't want a dog, but she has been just kind of our friend and our buddy, especially for my son that I told you has ADHD. He's he kind of that's his winding down, if you will, chases her around the house in the middle, right before we go to bed. So I wanted to mention that, because I cannot not talk about Jaxie, because I was totally not a pet person, and now I'm like, what was I thinking this whole time? But I think because of the pandemic, it has made me more willing or more able to find that attachment with a dog. Plus, I was not a pet person, so I didn't know the difference, but now that I do, it's been great. But in terms of how it affected our policies, I think all of us up in the in Sacramento have been talking about mental health services, especially with our homelessness crisis, right? Homeless crisis. And we've all said it, that we need to invest. And, that's been kind of the rhetoric in the last few years. You've all heard it, but I don't really see that much of a difference. We haven't made a dent in those issues because of the mental health problems. I saw a meme once that had, somebody with an addiction problem, somebody, just lost their job, somebody with mental health issues, kind of, it was a cartoon, and everybody's kind of huddled, and it said, if we could only address the issue of homelessness, right? But you can't address that issue unless you address all of the issues surrounding it. And the unfortunate part is that it's not one size fits all. And all of you professionals know that it could be an addiction problem, but why is there an addiction problem? Is it, the trauma that they faced before? Is it, were you predisposed? Was it a family issue? I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that could contribute to that. And unless we figure out how to address it, unfortunately, it's case by case. And again, you're the experts, that we can't just say, oh, we're going to address mental health issues, and then all our problems are going to be gone, because it's not one issue. I do a lot of work with domestic violence. I'm the chair of the Select Committee of Domestic Violence, mainly because my sister is a survivor of domestic violence, who now is the senator Susan and I are the only two sisters in the legislature ever in the history of California. But the reason that I became the select committee chair was because of her. And then we helped her through some of that trauma. I still, see some lingering trauma and we're working through it, but she ran and now is the senator. So now she's addressing kind of her own pain through her legislation. So we do a lot of work with domestic violence. I do a lot of work on, I was a teacher for 16 years. So one of my favorite bills is mental health, providing mental health for early childhood education. I did a bill a couple of years ago on, can you imagine this? I had to write a bill that prevents 3 and 4 year olds from being expelled.
Wow.
Yes, I had to write a bill for that. But, and I got a lot of pushback. I will not call anybody out. That we'll save that for later. So I got a lot of pushback because I was taking money away from K-12. So then, and of course, a lot of teachers, I was a teacher, and those of you that teach know that if, what other resources, you can't just not expel kids, right? You have to provide them some kind of support. So the following year, I did a bill for mental health consultations for those 3 and 4 year olds, because obviously they're acting up, not because of their choice, but because there's something going on. So my mental health consultation provided support for the child, for the parent, and for the teacher, because just because we're teachers doesn't mean that we're equipped to be grandma, grandpa, nutritionist, doctor, and mental health provider. And so that was the way that I was able to help. So this year I'm running the same type of bill, but now for the early childhood education providers, but also, the folks that take care of our kids that get subsidies from the state, to be able to support them as well. So those are the types of legislation that I've done, but my colleagues have taken, kind of a different road. But the trauma, I think, has been and will continue to be, especially after the pandemic. But as bad as the pandemic has been, I am grateful for it, because now we're like, hey, this has been there. And even if we chose not to see it then, now we're seeing it and we can't ignore it anymore. It was very easy for us to go, oh, well, somebody's gonna take care of it. Now we're all feeling like we all have to take care of it. And we're highlighting, again, as horrible as the pandemic has been, now we know that we have to address it. If we don't, the lingering effects of not just kind of our own mental health, but for generations, we're going to be feeling this. And so I'm grateful. I mean, I guess that's the glass half full part of it, is that now we need to make sure we address it. But now the government knows that they have to invest in whereas before it was like, do what you can with what you have.
Right. And I think that's an important part of finding those ways to invest, and also having that system of supports, a multi-tiered system of supports coming from government through the mental health practitioners to school counselors, teachers, parents. It involves buy-in from all of those systems to ensure the well-being of the children, as well as the well-being of everyone who's in the community. Thank you guys all for sharing. Based on our time, we're going to move into the next topic. So I'm going to send it over to Jake to begin the next topic. Thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you for all those comments, and thanks for running that discussion for us, Ron. So obviously the pandemic has affected us in a number of ways personally. And one of the challenges with healing is that it's unfortunately not just impacted by our own actions. And so we need many to support us. And with that being the case, we need to involve the government in a number of ways. Assembly Member Rubio, with that being the case, how do you see the government serving in regard to the discussion on mental health, especially for victims and survivors of trauma?
Well, we have a really important role to play. And I think that our government investing, we had that conversation about investing in the things that are really going to make a difference, and I say this with the utmost respect, but when we're up here everybody is basically doing this, right? Because we all want to go back to our communities and show that we are doing something for them. Well, I think this is the opportunity that the demonstration of doing something for them is to be able to support the mental health of all of us. If I'm not okay, and I think we've said this over and over again, if I'm not okay, how are my children going to be okay? How is my community going to be okay? How are my constituents going to be okay? You know, and how are my staff members going to be okay? So I think is, you know, as we are all up here, instead of going like this for our own individual districts, we still do that. I mean, don't get me wrong. We're still, you know, we need to bring something back to our community, but we're looking at it more of a, you know, in a holistic, and I hate to use that term, but in a global kind of a way, because what I receive for my district is great, but how is that going to impact my next door neighbor's district, for example, or how is that going to affect Northern California versus Southern California? I think that now we have to think about what policies we implement have to be able to be implemented up and down the state, not just for my district. You know, the mental health aspect of it, we're investing in early childhood education. And, you know, some folks didn't seem to understand how important that was, especially the communities that, you know, have kind of an older generations are like, why do I care that the government's investing in early childhood education if I'm in my twilight years, right? But now that we see that we're all connected, we know that we have to invest because our communities are going to be better if our kids are taught well and their mental health, mental state is such that they're able to benefit or to be able to improve whatever situation they're in, and it affects all of us. So my next door neighbor that, you know, is a grandparent can see that my son being okay helps them because collectively, right, we're all lifting each other up. And again, as hard as the pandemic has been, that I think is the most important part, is that we're all in this together. We keep saying that, but now we see it. And, you know, I'll transition in a bit, but I had a conversation with, we were talking about education. So I was talking to the CTA folks about education, but I also do a lot of work. I sit on sub 1, which is health and human services. So I do a lot of work on foster youth and foster care systems. And so when I was talking to CTA, I said, you know, we're doing a disservice to the foster youth or foster care system, because you guys are talking to me about CTAA matters, which is education. But guess what? The foster kids that I'm trying to serve are your students. So we operate in silos, and we are not connecting the fact that teachers have the same kids that I'm trying to help. So instead of fighting about resources, you know, with teachers versus, in this case, at what I call the FFA, the foster care social workers, we're not fighting against each other. If we provide services and support to the foster care youth, then they're going to be okay in school, and we're all together. And we weren't looking at it like that. Sacramento and the federal government, quite frankly, we all operate in silos. We think that our issue is only our issue without seeing the connection. I think that the pandemic has made us say, okay, how many resources or how much of these resources can we share? Because the reality is foster kids are in the school system, right? And so we weren't able to see that before. And now we're like, hey, wait a minute, foster kids being okay means that the children in those classrooms are okay because it's the same kids. And so anyway, that's a long-winded answer, but the government has to see, we all have to see that we're all connected. We keep saying that, but we're not practicing it. And I think finally I see some glimmer of hope that we're all like, hey, we are in this together. And I think, you know, for the long run, if we can continue that collaboration and at least the mentality that we're all in this together, I think we're going to be okay. And the government can provide some of those services that are circular, if you will, that if I know that I'm providing this resource to the foster kids, then the teachers and the counselors are going to be okay. And then, you know, the jobs market is going to be okay, because now all of these folks are all mentally stable, and we've provided support for everybody, not just one particular group that we support.
Right. And I think with like in general legislations and legal actions, it's so easy to see it occur on a geographic basis, with districts and assemblies and everything. But especially when it comes to survivors of trauma, we don't exist based on, assembly or based on just state or whatever it is. We are collectively a group of survivors.
Yes.
And it shouldn't really matter where we live or where we're at as far as the process of healing that we get to go through, because all of our experiences matter. And so with that being the case, and the matter of fact that many of these voices are drowned out by so many other conversations, in what ways have you been able to lift some of these voices in your community?
It's been really amazing for me. I come from a teaching background. Actually, I have a business degree, and I was in human resources. Never thought I would ever be a teacher. And then I became a teacher and fell in love with, just the teaching and with the kids. And then I thought I was going to do that forever. And then now I find myself in Sacramento. So I feel like I have, not just the ability, but the resources to be able to support those communities. So like I told you, I do a lot of work with the foster youth, the foster care system. I think it's really important. The domestic violence survivors, and, quite frankly, folks that are going through it right now. I mean, we hear the statistics right now that even though we're not seeing it, we know that the trauma is occurring at a higher rate now, whether it be domestic violence, child abuse. I do a lot of work with children's advocacy centers as well. So child abuse, I do that work. And to be quite frank with you, sometimes it was for me to feel better. And I'll be really honest with you, because I was like, hey, look at what I'm doing, trying to be like that hero, right? But the reality is that making myself feel better is helping me uplift that community, because somehow I feel responsible and for kind of all of my constituents. And so, yes, I'll let me kind of back up a little. I'm the oldest child. And my brother went through some traumatic, I told you about my sister, but this was recently. But when my brother, when we were deported, I told you, and we came back to California, my brother was tested in English and didn't speak the language. And so he was put in a special education program because he was deemed, at the time, the terms are still being used, retarded. Well, it wasn't that he was retarded, it was that he didn't speak the language, and they tested him in a language other than his own. And so he was in special education for a long time. Once they figured out that it wasn't, that he was delayed in any way, is that he wasn't speaking the language, he was put back in a regular classroom. But by then, his mental state, he was depressed. He felt like he couldn't achieve. He dropped out of high school in the 9th grade because he was like, I'm just dumb. And so because I'm the oldest child, I always felt responsible. My parents didn't speak the language, and I was the oldest kid. Until this day, I have to tell you, and I get teary-eyed when I talk about this, I still want to fix what happened to my brother. And so my way of trying to fix it is trying to fix everything else. Not only kind of my own life, but now that I'm in this position, I want to fix everything. I want to fix the foster care system. I want to fix the education system, which is kind of impossible for one human to do. Yeah. But I put that burden on myself. And so I do what I can. I work, which is not healthy from our conversation. I work 13, 14-hour days, 7 days a week, because I'm only in this position for a limited amount of time. I've got 7 more years if I keep getting elected. And I figure that if I can, do as much as possible now, which is not healthy, Artemis, I heard it, and Melissa, I heard it is not healthy, but that's the way I feel better. And seeing some of those results, where the community, even giving that gift card to that family that maybe is only going to help them for that week, just at least makes me feel like I'm contributing something. And so, again, it kind of in a selfish kind of way makes me feel better, makes me feel like I'm helping my brother that I couldn't help because I'm only 14 months older than he is. So it's not like, there was a big way if I can help him, but helping the community makes me feel like I'm still trying to save my brother, and that I'm saving him by trying to save, everybody else, if that makes sense. And, Artemis and Melissa and even Ron, I'm putting so much pressure on myself. So I'm going to have to step back and go, okay, I can't fix everybody. But if I can fix one thing today, then that's a victory for today.
And it's very interesting, though. I mean, I can definitely relate. I'm the oldest of 6 children, and so that's always been like a caregiving spirit. Transitioning kind of into medicine, it's been interesting. I really love research, and it's kind of been that whole idea of wanting to reach out and help other communities. But I've realized how much I don't know and don't understand, and especially with like perspective taking, and there's simply a lot that I am not able to do or help because of that, because so many others are much more able to provide those things because they experience these different challenges every day in a way I cannot. So when it comes to maybe different communities that are as maybe harder or more difficult to relate with and understand, what has kind of been your experience in maybe being able to help empower them to speak up or to make changes, maybe per se from their own community?
Well, so I told you my story about, growing up in Mexico and then coming to the United States. I'm very, very lucky. I'm immensely blessed to be able to fit in kind of two worlds. If you, I speak Spanish. I came from, I'm undocumented. I was undocumented. I was a teacher, so I can really relate to, and I joke about this all the time because I grew up in downtown LA. And so I can be having breakfast with the homies in the morning and be having dinner with the governor, and I fit in both places. For me, it's really a blessing because I can go from one, kind of one space to another because of my experiences. And so I've been able to empower other communities and, just quite frankly, some young folks because they can relate to me. I did a talk to UC Merced a couple weeks ago, and the conversation was about kind of recycling. And I said, oh my God, I said, Mexicans are like the best recyclers ever. I said, raise your hand if that country crock container in your mom's refrigerator does not contain country crock, it's beans. And like everybody rose their hand. And so I'm blessed to be able to relate to kind of the different communities. So my way of kind of empowering is by telling my story so that now you have somebody that's like you. I grew up in a gang infested area, downtown LA. If you don't know the area, Pico Union is by far the most, kind of gang ridden community. I grew up there, so I'm able to fit in that world, but be able to come up here to Sacramento and be able to say, that's not how it is, and be able to speak from experience. And so when I'm in a community, and I'll use my community of Glendora, which is more affluent, more, kind of middle class, right? I'm able to relate to them because I have a business degree, and I've been able to go down there and say, hey, like, even if you don't agree with the policies that we have, these are the reasons why, and they respect me because I am very open and frank with them. And again, I can say, hey, I'll talk to the governor later as a joke, but literally I can talk to the governor later, right? And so I'm able to go from one community to the other. But again, it's a blessing for me. And I know that not everybody has the same experiences that I do, but I try to make sure that everybody, I'm very frank and bold, and, I tell the truth as, and even if you don't like it and we don't agree, I'll be like, yep, nope, that's not going to happen. They're like, well, can we, some of them tell me like, can you at least lie to me a little bit? I'm like, no, because I'm able to tell you. And because I'm so kind of frank about stuff, they trust that I'm telling them the truth. So that's my way of uplifting, I guess, the communities. Is telling my story has been the most powerful thing for me. I speak to a lot of young men and women, and kind of in the high schools and the colleges, and so that's my way of trying to uplift those communities.
Can I chime quick with that, because I wanted to play off what she said. I think being a person of color, and I'm from Vallejo, so I worked in the Vallejo school district, and I worked with kids. I was a therapist in the school district, and a lot of them would always say, like, I want a therapist that looks like me, right?
Mhm.
And understands where I come from. Because like I said, I was also raised in a really rough neighborhood in the LMFT projects in San Francisco. So I was raised in a very rough neighborhood, grew up very rough. And to be able to have the educational piece and also the personal experience, you're able to connect with people a little bit more. So I felt when you said that, like, you're able to kick it with the homies and then go to a meeting with the governor and still play both roles because you understand that world. I really, that resonated with me. But I also think that resonates with mental health too. When people see people like them that can help them, it makes it easier for them.
For that connection, right? That connection is important.
Yep.
I also want to chime in. So Assemblyman Rubio, I just really wanted to honor, I really appreciate your candidness and your authenticity, because I think that's what we really need more in leadership is the transparency. And there's no shame for you working your 13 hours a week because it doesn't fall all on you. It's actually, how can we all support you too, right? Because we're all in this together, and it's sad that that's also how we operate on a larger global level, that we're not supporting, even in positions of leadership of where you're able to take care of yourself, so I just really want to acknowledge that. And I think by you speaking up about it, I really appreciate too, because that's how we heal in community, is letting go of shame and realizing it doesn't matter, even as you were sharing, like the position that you're in, you're still human, right? It's like our humanity that's going to connect us with. So I just wanted to add that. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Artemis.
I just wanted to piggyback on that too as well, because I think although it is a very powerful experience to meet a practitioner of color and you assume that there's a connection, I think it can also be very traumatic to meet a practitioner of color and then there's a disconnect. So I think I want to salute you for not only sharing your story, but then actually having outputs and making things accessible. I think it is often that gap, and like the team like coming behind that and then lifting, and because then you still got the disparities of people then engaging a resource once you create it, you know what I mean? And I think it's that lack of cultural competency why we don't engage. So I just salute you definitely, as she was saying, because I think as you do speak and we see that we can be more than, that's another thing that lifts all tides. It's like seeing us in those positions and seeing that our lingo isn't unprofessional.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because I feel like that's one way that they regulate it, especially as healthcare providers. And that's how you end up becoming whitewashed, in the culture is what we would say, it's because we get so, in that lingo. So I just salute you for being able to hold that and be integrated, not assimilated into the culture.
Thank you. Thank you.
Keeping it real. Love it.
Yes. Yes.
But I think
that's one.
Oh, go ahead.
No, that's one of my kind of my reputation up here. I keep it real, and there's a thing called memberitis that people talk about. Being a member, and you think you're, that all that memberitis. I always try to remember where I came from, because when I'm connecting with somebody, or that disconnect, Napoleon, is important to me, and for me to be able to connect and be able to share something is really important. So I don't have memberitis, because I'm like, we're just, like I said earlier, we're just human, and we just happen to have these positions for a limited amount of time, because trust and believe that in 50 years you're going to say there's been 4,500 legislators, but that Blanca Rubio, nobody's going to care, right? So I have to do what I can do now, and then not pretend that it's going to be some kind of a legacy, or that somebody 50 years from now is going to go, oh my God, she was amazing. I'm accountable to myself, to my children, and to the community at the moment. After that, who knows what'll happen, but thank you.
Well, I think with authenticity too, it's important because it goes far beyond the basic, demographics of ethnicity, race, age, whatever it is, because there's so many other things that we can connect on that go from that aren't seen on the surface, especially as a gay male and a survivor of sexual violence. Like, a lot of people don't see that, like when I walk out. But when I have conversations with people who are authentic, who are able to help me understand that they also know what it feels like to be different and discriminated against or whatever, it goes a long way for me. And I think it goes a long way for others, especially that have gone through trauma or currently deal with mental health issues. I did want to ask one more question, if that's okay in this section. Can you talk about any specific legislation or recent legislation that have worked in regards to mental health or trauma?
So I did a bill, and it seemed simple at the time, but and I thought it was no big deal. So I did a bill, and again, I felt like it was no big deal, but I think for some folks it was a big deal. I did a bill a few years ago where it increased the amount of money that a domestic violence victim was able to access so that they can get housing. So they got vouchers for, I think, I believe it was 8 days, and we were able to extend it for 30 days. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. At the time, I didn't really understand the impact of that, right? Because I was like, oh, we're doing this, for domestic violence victims. Then I ran into, it was, I think God was just sending me a sign, like, keep doing what you're doing. But I ran into somebody that happens to be not a counselor, a social worker. And I said, oh, my name is Blanca Rubio. We were at some event, and she's like, oh my God, I do work with domestic violence, women, and your bill that extended, the time that they can have money for housing is amazing. I was like, oh my God, like somebody actually, like it, like in our head, we want to help everybody, right? But then to actually see somebody that says, oh my God, this woman couldn't get out of her situation. The 8 days was not enough to get through trauma, and then try to find, go and get services and get, CalFresh and CalWorks. 8 days was not enough. Your bill gave her the ability to take a pause, not have to rush into anything. And, she's gotten her life together. And I was like, wow. So for me, to be able to see what just one person, right, to be able to see that was like, I am doing something right. And so it gave me kind of the courage to be a little bit more bold. And the foster youth kids are just, that it has become kind of my passion, because we have foster kids that are like one age one day, right, and then they have a birthday and then we cut them off. Like, how, if they were not capable the day before, how are they capable the day after? And so that, doing the work for the foster kids, and Jake, and I'm sure you all know, if you're mental, that some of our kids, especially the foster kids, are the most traumatized, because they are either LGBTQ, and in a Hispanic community, that's taboo, right? In a lot of communities, but specifically in the community that I come from, it baffles me. I was a school board member too. It baffles me how you can love your child so much one day, but then they come out and you're like disowning them. I'm like, I have my own children. If I love my children as much as I say I do, one conversation can't change that love. And so it's really traumatic for our foster kids. They become foster care because of a lot of those experiences. They're homeless at a higher rate than anybody else. They're assaulted at a higher rate than everybody else. And for me, that just, that passion translates into hopefully some good policies that can help them. I've done, a lot of bills trying to help our foster youth. I did get an award once, and I'm really proud of it, for being a champion for our foster kids. And I won't show it to you, but it sits there as a reminder of what I can do, and just the ability to be able to affect that change. I know I'm long-winded, but I just wanted to share that sometimes I don't see what the effect of what my legislation or my policies have been, but I know now that even if I can't see it, I know it's there. And so that brings me joy. And when I run into somebody that says, hey, you helped me, it just obviously was the highlight of probably my life. But now, even though I don't see it and can't touch it, I know it's helping.
And on a personal note, I would like to thank you for that. I have a foster brother that lived with us for 2 years. And I came to recognize a lot of the mental health challenges and other challenges that exist within people that have gone through that process. And before I came out as gay, as a teenager, my whole life, I thought if they found out, I would be adopted. And that was a lot of like fear that I had. Unfortunately, I wasn't adopted, but I have many friends that were kicked out of their homes, homeless, put in the foster care system because they were lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or whatever they identified with. And so that goes a long way. And I think that it's kind of the perfect segue into our final topic of what to do next, because there's so much that there is still to be done in terms of mental health, in terms of helping survivors of trauma. So with that being the case, and this is kind of open to anybody who wants to share, but are there any aspects of mental health that you think needs to be discussed more?
The experts. I have to leave it to the experts because I think I've spoken enough, but I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts, because then that'll help me, and maybe we can partner up on some pieces of legislations in the future on how to address those issues. So please school me on that.
So I'll just jump in and say first, shout out to you again, Queen, because you are already doing a big piece of it, which is creating the legislations that actually create funding for the innovation to take place at the grassroots level. At the end of the day, I think that in regarding to mental health, I think any and all aspects of it can be discussed because it's such a stigma, and those who experience it are discriminated against so much. Sorry about that. I got the low battery notification there. I think that when you have those underlying experiences or stigmas, whether that be you're coming out or you've been touched, I think it puts more energy towards you becoming more of a person of low SES. And that says that, man, people of lower SES, people with low in income, education, in poor neighborhoods, they're dying at a much more faster rate from preventable illnesses. So I think that we have to hashtag not alone, keep talking about it in general. I'm one of the best clinical psychologists that I know. And if I were to bring my family together and say, hey, let's all have a family conversation, they'll look at me like, boy, like what's going on? And like, because it's such, I hear you, you're Superwoman, like you're over here, like I feel like you're doing this and I feel like you're doing that. And I feel like that's the future too, really, of looking at how can we really create innovative, high quality programs for our caregivers, our staff, who are people like you, people like me, who are also holding things and taking care of us also takes care of the greater community. So, in regarding to mental health, I think that continuing to make them accessible, continuing to try to find ways to make them innovative. I think that's why utilizing the arts is so powerful, because a lot of this stuff, when you start talking about severe mental health, conversion disorders, even things like irritable bowel syndrome, I mean, those things can be very abstract and hard to talk about. And don't wait until you go into the ER, the psych ER room, because then you get to really kind of see what's there. So I want to encourage us to continue to create legislation and create programming that's there, that's accessible, and that's engaging. So people know that it really is a right to actually feel safe and to feel like you can express yourself and not a luxury.
I think from because I work in the schools, I think what I'm seeing is like that needs that I've done this year was like I offered a lot of like groups for kids dealing with mental health trauma or especially with African American young men and Hispanic young men where I come from, the stigma around mental health is like, oh, they don't want to talk about it. But we did this year was kind of do some groups around that, and it was just amazing. I think trying to giving access to these lower income communities like Vallejo, areas like that, and putting these therapists in there in groups and running those groups really make a big difference. And I appreciate, you really looking towards that, doing those things for the community, lower end communities, and really looking at the foster care system, because Vallejo has a lot of foster care systems. So like those things make it so much easier when you go in as a therapist and you know where they're coming from, and you're able to really, they're able to access those things in their school.
Just adding on to what everybody shared, I really, am in support of making equal, accessible care to communities underserved as quality of care, just as anybody with privilege, because I think in the behavioral health system, there's not as quality of care if you have Medi-Cal. And as somebody in the past, I've been homeless, I've been on the streets. I also struggled. I had still a lot of complex PTSD, and I'm still working through a lot of complex PTSD, but a lot of it I ran from coming out with my queer identity, being bisexual, and also coming to terms with being multiracial and all these other factors, kind of what we're speaking to. But point being is that there's not enough, like Napoleon has been beautifully really stressing, a lot of the culturally responsive care of being attuned to meeting kids and communities where they're at. But getting back to basics, I feel like if we implemented more in the programs, the arts again, dance, spoken word, because that's what I did a lot. Right now I'm kind of in border of LA, Orange County. I'm moving back up to Sacramento, but when I was involved in the Palm Desert, Palm Springs area, I was pretty active in the community there with nonprofits and putting on like creative nights, because if that's the way you connect, it comes down to basic connection. I think we've really lost touch with that dance movement, like just bringing it back to the basics, because it's like, if we have just like the basics of that down, then we can build on that. But it really comes back down to connection, community, safety, especially with trauma, and I think a big part of mental health is connection. It's letting go of shame. I think and I just wanted to clarify one thing. I'm not trying to shame technology. Like, technology is beneficial. I mean, I even grew up like kind of in the benefit of it, but at the same time, there does still need to be this, in the interactions, in the programs that we're creating, this creative aspect of where if we can be intentional in how we're serving our communities, serving children, serving anybody, where we're engaging in a way that gets them to connect to themselves in a safe way. And creativity is the most beautiful way to do that, because creativity, it's raw, authentic expression where you actually feel safe to be able to just create, so and even in that, creating safety around expression, because there's a lot still, even in like this discussion of creativity, there has to be a certain amount of safety in the body to even be able to like be expressive and vulnerable. So
yeah.
And if I could kind of almost piggyback off that and add a response to my own question there. I think one of the best ways that I don't know about the best, but an easy way to create safe spaces is especially with gender affirmations. As a kind of self-identified feminist, I really obviously believe that we need to do so much more for the fellow women out there. But also, I think in terms of mental health, I think that we need to include men more in the discussion.
Yeah.
As a founder of Speak Up, Not Man Up, trying to raise awareness for male survivors of sexual violence, I find that most of the literature out there, a number of the organizations out there, even a lot of the bills and resources specifically leave out the term male or men or anything. And it's hard for me to feel like my voice is heard. And sometimes it can even be triggering to feel like, oh, like I'm forgotten about and my opinions don't matter. So I think that's also even a simple thing that we can do to help.
Well, and if I may, and I told you that I do a lot of work with domestic violence, specifically because of my sister, and as much as I have to say it, I hate her ex-husband. The problem is we can't eradicate domestic violence if we don't address the perpetrator or the abuser, right? And as much as I hate him, And it is a strong word. And if I saw him right now, I, would not be able to not be angry with him. What are we doing for the abusers? Because the reality is that we try to help survivors, right? We're always putting, which we should, right? But we're talking about supporting the survivor, this, that, but we can't eradicate domestic violence or any kind of violence if we don't address the issues of the folks that are creating that violence, or the ones that are abusing. And so that's the part that I think, and I know we're coming close to the end, but how do we address that? Because we cannot fix domestic violence or any kind of other violence if we don't address the issues of the abusers. And again, as much as I hate my sister's ex-husband, he needs help, because even though my sister is going to be fine now, his next person is not going to be fine, or his next victim is not going to be fine, because we are not addressing the issue of him. And that's very difficult for me. And I have to tell you, because I want to kill him because of what he did to my sister. But if we don't address his issue, my sister Susan's not going to be the only victim. He's going to have, his current girlfriend is going to be the next victim, and the girlfriend after that is going to be the victim. And I think that we don't have enough conversations. To your point, Jake, I know that's not what you were talking about, but it's addressing the issue of the abuser, right? And in this case, the abuser, because they have issues as well. And if we're not addressing their mental health issues, we're never going to be okay. And in the case of, violence, right, Jake, if we don't address those issues, we're not going to be okay as a society, because we're not addressing the other part of why we have victims, the abusers. Right. So I need help, and I try to think about what we can do, but my anger towards my sister's ex-husband always kind of takes root in kind of what I don't want to address it, but we need to address those issues. Otherwise we can never move forward with that abuse.
I think we've spoken a lot about environment and its effect, and we've talked about identity and how it's definitely plays a role in how people are experiencing trauma. And as a young African-American man from Oakland, moving to San Diego and teaching a lot of kids who may cross the border in the morning, mm-hmm. I can see those connections and also those disconnects and how we may connect. But at the same time, there are things that I think are interesting that I want to transition into now, which is how can we, from a mental health standpoint and from a policy standpoint, shift the dominant discourse surrounding mental health in terms of how people perceive mental health, how people have access to mental health, from, like you said, young males having access, and from, I want to hear from everyone here of how we can start to shift that dominant discourse so that mental health does become more of a front running conversation. And so more people do feel that they can access this and go out of their way to get the support they need.
So
I said I'll let others do it, because I know I take over the conversation sometimes. So please, I want to hear from the professionals.
I just want to go back to one thing you were saying and connecting it to this. Hashtag Black Lives Matter. And I think that if our prison actually reformed instead of actually making things worse, I think that we would actually have a greater value in calling the police on perpetrators, culturally speaking and clinically speaking. I often find that is often the driver, is the woman or the one party not wanting to actually have the law be involved because of the fear of law, because again, it feels like it often makes things worse. I think that if we actually had high quality, culturally competent, integrated healthcare in our jail systems, we actually had behavioral health coaches paired with our law enforcement. So when that type of thing happened, we're addressing the physical, the stress, the mental, the spiritual, all this other stuff. I think that people will be more willing to be engaged, because now, as men, especially Black, poor men of color, the only time that we're engaged by mental health is via the police or some assessment that we're doing for some test if we're lucky. I don't think we have that much access to it, So I think, making it access through our law and making that a high quality, culturally competent type of situation.
You hit I want to piggyback. You hit it right on the head, and that, like you said, like it starts with like making it more of a rehabilitation instead of like oh, you did something wrong, we're just going to throw you away. So you hit it right on the head, and I appreciate that. I appreciate what you said.
Yeah, and just in adding on what everybody's been sharing, I think it's just continuing to just create dialogue and just talking about it, where we're decreasing the shame. Because I mean, the only way that there's going to just be an increase in awareness is if, schools are talking about it more, and then they're being told to talk about it with their students, and then students are hearing it's being normalized about mental health, and they are aware of the services that they have. Because I know growing up, I wasn't even aware still of the services that were even going on, because it wasn't really talked about in the classroom as much, and one thing, community, that I do want to also address that doesn't really get spoken to as much is community of disabilities too. I have, and I'm guilty of this, and I share this with my friends from who deal with disabilities, even my friends of color who struggle with disabilities, is that it's not, their voices aren't heard as much. It's not in the media as much, it's not giving as much attention. So I think it's also important that we start giving more space for them to be a part of the conversations around these sorts of issues, especially with culturally responsive care too.
Right. That touches on a huge part as well, in terms of in schools, how students with disabilities and students with certain challenges, and like Assembly Member, you mentioned with expulsion for 3 and 4-year-olds, it's interesting because we have a system, this punitive form of punishment that has been, research has shown doesn't work.
Yeah.
And we keep on recycling this form of punishment based on traditional conversations, rather we need to start moving towards the progressive ideas of restorative justice techniques, and how we can start implementing that in schools and also within law enforcement, and how we can start to create policies that reflect those ideas, so that the community as a whole are hearing that from when they are 3, 4 years old up until they're adults, and how they interact with law enforcement. So I'm curious, Assembly Member as well, and I see Melissa, you might be wanting to say something as well, of how we can start to shift this in terms of actionable change.
Well, Ron, if I may, look, I told you that I grew up in downtown LA, and
Right.
And hopefully that gives you a sense as to what I'm going to say. And not everybody's innocent, right? But not everybody's guilty. And the problem that I see is that we're trying to take that one broad stroke approach to fixing the system. And I stayed off of a bill, AB 433, and I'm still getting asked, or it's 433 asked. It's about decreasing the gang enhancement in sentencing, and I didn't vote for it. The bill has not passed, and I have to be really honest with you, because of where I grew up. I grew up in downtown LA. I was basically traumatized by a lot of the gang members, right? And people don't understand why I would stay off of that bill. And the question that I keep asking is, I want to do what I can to restore, some of the incarcerated, but what happens to the victims? In this conversation, we have not had the conversation about what happens to those victims, because, say whatever you want. I'm going to say I've been authentic with you the whole entire time. The folks that I hung out with were not innocent. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, but when I try to have that conversation with my colleagues, right away, they're like, oh, you just don't care about you name it, Black people, brown people, whatever. I'm like, look at me. I'm a Latina woman who was deported when I was a kid, right? And so for you to label me as I don't care because I happen not to vote for this one bill is not right. Because if we don't address all aspects of it, and I'll get to the incarcerated in a minute. Yes, we're gonna help the incarcerated, but what happens to the victims? Because if we don't restore or we don't help those incarcerated, guess where they're going back when we take them out of jail? Back to those same communities. And again, those folks that we are not dealing with their trauma or whatever it is that they're going to go and terrorize their community again.
Mhm.
Right. And so just saying restorative justice sounds great,
Yeah.
but if we're not doing it, because let me tell you, we keep talking about defunding the police. That was the conversation last year. And I happen to have said this. I am a CTA card carrying member. I am a teacher, right? I said, if we're going to talk about defunding the police, where is the conversation about defunding teachers? And they were like shocked with what I said. I said, look, let me just really be honest with you. 75% of the folks incarcerated right now are illiterate. That is not the police's issue.
Yeah.
The police didn't create that. So if we're going to have a real conversation about restorative justice, the education system and the education piece has to be there. But when I say this, folks look at me like, oh my God, how dare you talk bad about teachers? I'm not talking bad about all teachers, right? But if we don't connect the fact that 75% of our incarcerated people are illiterate, that didn't happen with police. That happened in the education system. And so we're not having the conversations on everything, because we can blame the police because with good cause, right? We're seeing it, but we're not holding the education system responsible for that, because if our kids were taught and were provided those opportunities, guess what? Maybe they wouldn't be in the judicial system, right? And so when we talk about restoring, some of those folks, guess what? We're not providing the education in the jails that they deserve. We let people out of jail with $300 in their pocket, without a trade, without an education. What the heck are they supposed to do?
Mhm.
They come out with $300, really, and we expect them to go, oh, there you go get a job with no skills. So if we don't address those issues in a comprehensive way and include the education system, to your point, Napoleon, earlier, then we're not doing right. Then we are only a hashtag. We're only a hashtag because we're not addressing the actual issues, the trauma that some of these folks that are incarcerated have dealt with. We're not providing those services in the jails. We're not providing the education. We're not providing technical, any kind of job skills. So when they come out with their $300, what do we expect is going to happen?
Yeah.
They're not going to, like I talked about our foster kids. You go from having a birth, being not capable of supporting yourself, but because you have a birthday, now we expect you to be able to support yourself. The expectations are not realistic. And until we address all aspects of it, all we are is hashtags.
Definitely. That brings up a good conversation about how we are funding education, how class size may be affecting students, how the mental health is integrated in schools. That's a whole different conversation in terms of funding, in terms of appropriate care, in terms of proper professional development. Being at the school, I'm very passionate about those things. But based on our time, I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to finish their thoughts. We only have a couple seconds left. So if anybody else has any quick little things that you want to chime in about just before we wrap up.
One thing I think, sorry, go ahead, Napoleon.
No, go. I'll go after you.
I wanted to add, what I'm seeing with teachers as I work in the district, they need to have trainings on mental health. That's just what it is. That's
trauma informed.
They're trauma informed. They don't have it, and that's where the delay is on how to deal with some of these kids with disabilities or behavioral issues. So that's just my little input.
I agree.
So I'm in agreement with that, and at the same time, I think the struggle is we're asking them to do more, and we're paying them less. And my thing is, I grew up here in Pittsburgh, El Pablo, and it's crazy. In my doctoral studies, I went to a school over in Orinda, and when Tommy acted up in class, they called me. I did an assessment. Come to find out, he has PTSD because his father isn't in his household. He got the diagnosis and got accommodated and got supported. So I'm in agreement. Those things that you're saying, I think we do need to fund academics. I think we do need to make things equitable, like mental health, the same way that Tommy has mental health access in, Moraga. I think, we need to have in District 9 in Alameda, So I'm in agreement with everything that you said.
And one last thing I wanted to add on what Melissa said about the trauma-informed education. We even need to have even a revision of the type of trauma-informed education that we're giving, because we can get all this head knowledge, but if we're not creating new experiences and connection, it comes back down to connection. If we're not creating connections between teachers with the material to actually integrate it experientially,
Thank you.
hey, and I can't blame the teachers at the same time, because if they have their trauma, you can't process things and learn things when you're in a trauma stress state. And then we expect kids to learn really well when they're struggling with their trauma. A huge part of learning to actually excel academically is to be able mentally and emotionally be grounded, right? And obviously have your physical survival needs met first. But we also need to start to see more shifts in the trauma-informed care and education that we're actually implementing, because I think a lot of it is still heady and it's not actually more experiential and building relationships. There should be more trainings on actual real life stuff that happens, and everybody coming in the room and working through it in a process oriented. And I know it's uncomfortable, but that's where like the real shift's gonna like happen. So
yeah, I want to jump in. I have to be the bad guy. I'm so sorry.
We're on a roll. Come on.
I know. And also it feels like you were like planted, because literally is one of the things that Yellow Heart Committee is working on in conjunction with the Boys and Girls Club is hosting focus groups on creating mental health curriculum to implement in middle schools. And so if anyone is interested in that space, let me know. Our team works super hard to create that. And we're working with people who are in the policy space along with, therapy space too, and things like that. But just wanted to add that one, Assembly Member Rubio, you bringing up about addressing the perpetrators and their problems hit home for me. I actually have my first court trial with my rapist next week. So hearing these things are all things that, we go through, we talk about it, but it's like, these are the faces and the people who are actually enduring it and have to see face to face to the people who hurt them and let a jury decide if their trauma is valid or not. So, I mean, this was an amazing conversation. I want to propose we do this a part 2.
Yes. Yes.
So this is a great group of people. Y'all were just knocking it out the park. And so I just want to say thank you all again for tuning in and like joining us. I mean, Noya, if you want to come back on too and add your 2 cents, because this was great. And I mean, follow us on our social media, engage with us. We have a lot of these different types of discussions. And again, I'm completely open to doing a part 2 if everybody is down.
Yes, absolutely. I am.
So we'll find.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, the conversation was extremely amazing to listen into. And yeah, thanks again for everyone's participation. It was really cool to see.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll figure out another time to do this one. But again, this will be released next Monday. And then maybe we'll do a live one for the next, because this was great. And I really would love for people to be able to comment and engage. So thank you all again so much. And I'll be following up with information and everything like that. So have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Nice meeting you all. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
You guys killed it. You did great with the transitions, 100%.
Good job, India.
Thanks.
Great job setting this up. This is amazing. And you're doing good work, and you're getting the right people for the work. So that's some good stuff.
Yeah, no, like I said, y'all killed it. Even Jake didn't have his notifications on. I don't know if he told you that.
It worked though. It all worked out. So that's as long as, like you said, the conversation's natural and it's flowing, then it's all good.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much. And like I said, I'll get you all everything, but have a great evening.
You too. Appreciate you.
Nice meeting you, Ron.
Nice to meet you too, Noya. Bye.
Bye.
Peace.
All right. Let me end this real quick.
For sure.